Welcome to the HFY Codex Tale. If you like our videos, keep supporting and subscribe to our channel. The human name written on her DNA. Lyra was born in a lab, not in a home. She didn't cry like other alien children. She simply opened her eyes, glowing silver, and stared at the lights above her. The scientists whispered. Their voices were excited, but nervous too. The pairing worked. It accepted the human name. Now we wait. They raised her like a research subject. No mother, no father, just doctors in clean white robes and glowing screens. She always felt different. Because she was. On her left wrist under her skin was a name. Not a code, not a number. A human name. Jason. For years, Lyra didn't know what it meant. She asked many times, "Why do I have a name that is not mine?" They always gave the same answer. "It is your mate's name. He lives far away. One day you will meet him." She tried to forget, but the name stayed. It glowed faintly like a light under her skin. She covered it with cloth. She told herself it didn't matter. But deep inside, she wondered who was Jason. Was he old? Was he kind? Did he even know she existed? On her 18th cycle, everything changed. A message came from the council. The bond has reached its final stage. The human has reached maturity. It is time for contact. Lyra stood in the center of the bonding chamber. Around her, the elders watched silently. A large screen showed an image of Earth. A small blue planet full of noise, fire, and chaos. She had never seen it in person. One elder stepped forward. "You were paired with a human before birth. The technology selected your match. His DNA is a perfect balance to yours. His name, Jason Carter, was entered into your cells on the first day." Lyra looked down at her wrist. It glowed softly. "Jason, you will now travel to Earth," the elder said. "You will find him, and when you meet, the bond will activate completely." "What if he refuses?" she asked. The room went quiet. Then another elder said, "He will not, he cannot. The bond is destiny." Lyra's voice was quiet. "What if I don't want it anymore?" A long silence. "Then you will be incomplete," said the elder, "forever." The journey took 2 days. She traveled inside a small silent pod, alone. She watched Earth grow larger through the window. So many lights, so many voices. It felt wild, strange. But she didn't feel fear. Only one question echoed in her mind. Will he recognize me? When the pod landed in a hidden forest near a human city, the system scanned for his signal. It was easy to find, because her body pulled toward him. The bond was awake. She stepped out of the pod and walked toward the signal. Her cloak wrapped tight around her body. Her boots crushed the leaves below. Her heart beat fast, but not with fear. It was something else. A house appeared beyond the trees. Lights on, human voices inside. One of them was his. She stepped to the edge of the grass and whispered, "Jason." Inside the house, Jason Carter stood in his kitchen with a half-eaten sandwich. His phone buzzed again. Another weird message from an unknown source. "Your mate has arrived. Go outside." He frowned. "Is this a prank?" Then the lights flickered. The air went still. He opened the door and saw her. She stood in the yard, glowing softly, her silver skin lit by the moon. Who are you?" he asked. She stepped forward and spoke one word. "Lyra." He stepped back. "What do you want?" She raised her arm. The skin on her wrist shimmered. His name appeared, glowing. "Jason." He stared at it, stunned. I don't understand." Her eyes softened. "You don't have to, but the bond has started, and I had no choice but to find you." He shook his head. "This is crazy. This isn't real." She looked down, then whispered, "I thought the same thing, until I heard your voice, until my body started shaking when I got close to you, until I couldn't breathe unless I followed this pull." He stared at her. Part of him wanted to shut the door. The other part couldn't move, couldn't look away, because something in him, deep, buried, unexplainable, felt like it knew her. And that scared him more than anything else. He thought it was a joke until she landed in his backyard. 3 days before she arrived, Jason Carter received a strange email. No subject, no sender. Just one line of text. Your bondmate is coming, prepare yourself. He laughed, thinking it was spam, or some sci-fi fan messing around online. So he deleted it and moved on with his day. But the next night, another message came. Her name is Lyra. Her DNA carries your name. She belongs to you by design. He blinked. By design. He laughed again, but this time it sounded more nervous. He didn't reply. Instead, he told his best friend Marcus at the gym. Some alien girl says we're matched by DNA. I'm her mate. What does that even mean? Marcus laughed. Bro, if she's hot, tell her I'm single. Jason rolled his eyes. It's probably AI-generated junk. Still, that night he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing that name, Lyra, over and over in his head. Then the crash happened. It was just after midnight. Jason was brushing his teeth when the sky lit up. A loud boom shook the windows. The power blinked. Every dog in the neighborhood started barking. He ran outside barefoot. In the distance, beyond the trees behind his backyard, smoke rose into the sky. Something had fallen, something big. He jumped the fence and sprinted into the woods. What he found wasn't fire. It was a ship. Small, sleek, half buried in the ground. He stared at it with wide eyes. No way. A door opened with a hiss. Light spilled out, and she stepped into view. The same girl from the yard days ago. Silver skin, long dark hair, soft glowing eyes. She didn't say anything. Just walked toward him, calm, slow, like she already knew him. Jason backed up. What is this? Who are you? Are you human? She stopped a few feet from him. No, she said quietly, but you are mine. He blinked. Excuse me. She raised her arm again. His name glowed under her skin. Jason. She spoke again. My name is Lyra. I was created with your name inside me. Your DNA matches mine. The bond is awakening. I followed it here. Jason rubbed his temples. This has to be a dream. I don't think humans dream this clearly, she said softly. He looked her up and down. Why me? What do you want? I don't want anything, she said. I was told you are my mate. I came to let you see me so you could feel it too. I don't feel anything, he said quickly. But he was lying. Because deep in his chest, something felt strange. Like a magnet was turning behind his heart. Like gravity was shifting. Like the world suddenly tilted, and she was at the center. He pushed the feeling down. This is insane. She nodded slowly. Yes, but it's real. Back at his house, she sat on the floor in silence while he made her tea. She didn't eat, didn't drink, just watched the steam rise. Jason paced back and forth, still trying to make sense of it all. So let me get this straight. You're not human. You were created like grown, with my name inside your body. For what, some weird alien marriage program? Lyra looked up. To preserve peace between our worlds, the elders thought matching DNA was the safest way. Our bond is supposed to prove two species can join without war. Jason dropped onto the couch. I'm just a guy who fixes computers. You're telling me I'm part of a space treaty. Lyra touched the floor gently. I didn't choose this either, but I had dreams of your face long before I arrived. He stared at her. You dreamed about me. She nodded, always the same. You were standing in the light reaching for me, but I could never touch you. Jason didn't know what to say. It sounded crazy, but also honest. Too honest to be fake. He walked her back to the guest room, gave her a blanket, and said, You can stay here tonight. We'll figure this out in the morning. Before she entered the room, she turned to him. If you don't want the bond, I'll go, but I had to try. I had to see your eyes once. That's all I ever asked for. And then she disappeared behind the door. Jason stood in the hallway for a long time, thinking. His heart beat too loud. Because something about her words didn't feel like a lie. They felt like a memory he forgot he had. She felt pain when he tried to leave. The next morning, Jason woke up early. The sun was rising, and birds were chirping outside. Everything felt normal. Too normal. He sat up fast. Was it all a dream? He rushed down the hallway and stopped. The guest room door was open. Lyra was sitting on the floor, still in her cloak, her eyes staring quietly at the sky outside. Jason exhaled slowly, so not a dream. You didn't sleep, he asked. She shook her head. I don't need sleep like humans. Jason rubbed the back of his neck. Right, of course you don't. There was silence between them for a long moment. Finally, he said what had been building in his chest since she landed. Look, Lyra, I still don't know if I can accept this bond. I don't even know you. She looked down. I understand. He added quickly, I'm not trying to be cruel. I need time. Lyra nodded. Take it. Jason stepped back. I'm going to clear my head, walk to town. But the moment he grabbed his coat and opened the front door, Lyra gasped. Her body jerked. She dropped to one knee. Jason spun around. Lyra. She clutched her chest, trembling. Her voice cracked. It hurts when you go far. Jason rushed back and grabbed her arm. What do you mean, what's happening? She closed her eyes, breathing hard. The bond is linked, not just in mind, but body. If one moves away too soon, the other feels the pull. It's too early, too fresh. Jason helped her sit down, panic flashing across his face. I didn't know. I didn't mean to hurt you. She nodded weakly. It's not your fault, but the bond thinks we are not supposed to be apart yet. Jason sat beside her, eyes wide. So if I leave, it hurts you? She nodded again. Until the bond stabilizes, yes. Jason looked at the door. At the world outside. Then at her sitting quietly, not blaming him, not crying, just enduring. How long does it take to stabilize? Lyra hesitated. It depends on if the feelings become real. Jason blinked. You mean if I care? Yes. He stayed home that day. He sat across from her at the table, made her tea, asked questions. She answered all of them. She told him about her world, its blue forests and silver cities, about the scientists who raised her, never hugging her, never laughing, about how they trained her to be his. My whole life I was prepared for this, she said softly. But now that I'm here, I realize they never prepared me for choice. Jason stared at her. You mean they never asked if you wanted this? She shook her head. They said the bond would guide me, that love would come after, but I want to know who you are before I give you my heart. Jason leaned back in his chair. That hit him deep. She wasn't here to control him. She was here to find herself, too. That evening, she stepped out onto the porch. Jason followed. They watched the stars. One blinked brighter than the rest, her crashed ship still cloaked and waiting to be found. What happens if I reject the bond? Jason asked quietly. Lyra didn't look at him. Then I will return. I'll be given a new mission, and this part of my life will be erased. Jason's breath caught. Erased? She nodded. The elders won't let a failed bond affect future matches. They will take my memories. I will forget everything. Jason whispered, even me. Her voice broke. Especially you. He looked at her long and hard. And you agreed to that? She turned toward him now. No, but I didn't come all this way to run from it either. That night, as Jason lay in bed, he couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because of one thought. If he walked away, she wouldn't just lose him. She'd lose herself. Others were watching, and now they want her back. High above Earth, something stirred in the void. A hidden satellite blinked to life. It wasn't human. It didn't belong to any nation. It belonged to them. The Council, silent watchers of the Bond Project. They had been tracking Lyra since the day she left their labs. And now they saw her signal had stabilized. One observer spoke softly into the dark. She has made contact with the human. Another added, the bond is holding longer than expected. A third voice, colder, sharper. If she begins to feel love, the bond will change. They all fell silent. Then the command came. She must be retrieved before she chooses. Back on Earth, Lyra stood in Jason's kitchen, holding a glass of water in both hands like it might float away. She still wasn't used to real homes, real furniture, real quiet. Jason was making toast. His movements were clumsy, but his energy was softer now. He didn't flinch when she walked near. He didn't question everything she said. "Do you like it here?" he asked, handing her the toast. She sniffed it, unsure. "It's warm." He chuckled, "That's a start." She sat at the table and watched the sun come in through the window. It touched her skin like something new. "I don't think I was ever meant to feel sunlight," she whispered. Jason sat across from her. "You were meant to live, Lyra, not just follow orders." She looked at him like she wanted to say something more, but her skin suddenly glowed faintly. Her wrist pulsed blue. Jason noticed it. "What's wrong?" Lyra stood slowly. Her eyes narrowed toward the sky. "They found me." Far above, a small black ship entered Earth's atmosphere, undetected by satellites, silent as a shadow. Inside were two beings, Council enforcers built for retrieval, built for silence. "We bring her home," one said. "Alive if possible, erased if necessary." That evening, Jason stepped outside to get some air. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no wind, no sound. Just silence. Then he saw it. A strange shimmer above the trees, like air bending. He backed up slowly. "Lyra," he shouted. She ran to him fast, her eyes glowing, voice sharp. "Get inside now." A pulse of blue light hit the ground beside them, turning a patch of grass into ash. Jason shouted, "What was that?" She grabbed his hand, "Not what, who?" They ran into the house. She threw up a shimmering energy shield around the walls. Jason ducked behind the counter. "Okay, now I believe everything." Lyra's breathing was fast, her voice was low. "They're here to take me back." Jason looked at her. "Why? The bond's not hurting anyone." She looked him dead in the eye. "Because if I choose you from my own will, the council loses control." He blinked, so this was never about peace. She shook her head. "It was about control, matchmaking by force. They don't want real love, they want obedience." Jason clenched his jaw. "Then we don't let them take you." Lyra looked at him, really looked at him. "You would fight for me." He stepped closer. "You came across the stars for me, Lyra. Now I'll stand right here for you." Outside, the enforcers scanned the house. One of them activated the neutralizer beam. "Prepare for mind lock. Wipe both if needed." Inside, Lyra gritted her teeth. "If they use mind lock, we'll both lose everything." Jason whispered, "Then let's give them nothing." He grabbed a metal pipe from the counter. She raised her palm, charging her energy core. They stood back to back. And as the sun set behind the Earth's edge, two souls, one human, one engineered, stood against a system that never believed in choice. But now, it was too late to erase what they felt. He touched her heart, and the bond changed. The storm passed in silence. The enforcers were gone. Chased off or confused. They hadn't expected resistance, especially not from a human. Jason sat beside Lyra in the small mountain cabin they'd found after escaping the city. His shirt was ripped, her arm was burned, but they were alive. And more than that, they were connected. Not just by the bond. By choice. The fire crackled softly. Jason leaned back against the wooden wall and asked, "So, are they coming back?" Lyra stared into the flames. "Probably. They don't let experiments make their own endings." Jason frowned. "You're not an experiment." She gave him a small smile. "You're the first one to say that." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You know, I used to think love was supposed to feel big, explosive, wild, but now it feels like this." She turned to him. "Like what?" "Quiet, warm, like something I didn't know I needed until it sat beside me." Lyra's glowing eyes softened. Her hand moved slowly, hesitantly, resting near his on the floor. "Not quite touching. Not yet. They said the bond would guide me," she whispered. "That it would grow only when I accepted you." She looked down at her wrist. The glow had changed. Before it was cold blue, mechanical, faint. Now it pulsed with warmth, golden, alive. Jason noticed it too. "What's happening?" She stared at the light with wonder. The bond is evolving. Jason blinked. Evolving into what? Into something it was never supposed to be. She placed her hand over his. Real. Later that night she dreamed. Not of orders, not of missions, not of empty halls and silent labs. She dreamed of laughter, of Jason's voice calling her name, of running together, not chased, not commanded, but free. When she woke, Jason was already outside, gathering firewood. She stepped into the sunlight and just watched him. He looked up and smiled. You okay? She nodded, better than I remember feeling. He walked over and handed her a mug of warm tea. She took it, fingers brushing his for a second longer than necessary. Why are you still helping me? She asked. You don't owe me anything. Jason looked serious now. You were made to match me, but I wasn't made for you. I had to choose you. And now I think I have. Lyra's eyes shimmered with something new. Something dangerous. Then the bond is now stronger than science. It's emotional, she said softly. If anyone tries to break it now, it might destroy me. Jason stepped closer. Then I'll protect it, I'll protect you. She didn't back away. Not this time. She stepped into his arms and let herself feel the warmth of someone choosing her. Not because of duty, not because of code, but because of heart. And in that moment, the pulse on her wrist spread up her arm and into her chest, glowing gold like a sunrise. But far above Earth, alarms were sounding. Inside a council satellite, voices shouted. The bond has shifted. It's gone rogue. This is no longer a test, it's a threat to the system. One voice colder than all spoke. Prepare the cutter, end it, even if it kills them both. They tried to cut the bond, but she fought back. The stars above Earth turned red that night. Not from fire, not from war, but from the glow of a council ship entering the atmosphere, silent, hidden, and carrying one thing. The bond cutter. It was an ancient device, illegal on most worlds, built to sever deep soul links between living beings. Once used, the connection would be gone, and so would the memories that came with it. Jason and Lyra didn't see the ship. They were asleep in the cabin, close but not touching. A quiet trust had grown between them. They no longer needed to speak to feel connected. But something was wrong. Lyra sat up suddenly, hand over her heart. They're here, she whispered. Jason rubbed his eyes. What, who? She stood, her eyes glowed gold now, not blue. They've brought the cutter. Jason jumped to his feet. What does that do? Lyra's voice shook. If they use it on me, I'll forget everything. You, Earth, us. Jason's heart dropped. No, that's not happening. Suddenly, the roof cracked. A beam of light shot down, flooding the cabin with white heat. Jason shielded his eyes. Lyra screamed. Her body glowed. Her knees hit the floor. Her wrist flared, gold twisting into red. They're starting the cut. Jason grabbed her. How do we stop it? She couldn't answer. Her voice broke into static. Her memories flickered. Jason, who are you? No, he shouted, holding her tighter. Stay with me. Outside, the cutter spun faster. Lights blinked. Systems synced. But something inside Lyra pushed back. Something the council didn't plan for. Something they never believed was possible. Real love. Her body began to glow brighter, brighter than the beam. The cutter buzzed louder, warning of instability. The ship's crew shouted. She's resisting. Impossible. Shut it down. But it was too late. Lyra screamed and pushed the energy outward. A shockwave exploded from her chest, breaking windows, ripping trees from their roots, and sending the council ship crashing into the mountainside. The bond pulsed once. Then again. Then silence. Jason opened his eyes slowly. The roof was gone. Ash floated through the air like snow. And in his arms, Lyra. Breathing, awake. She looked at him, eyes full of tears. I fought it. He held her tighter. You did more than that. She touched her wrist. The mark was no longer just a name. It had changed. Now his name glowed beside hers. Two names side by side, linked by more than science, linked by choice. That night, far above the planet, the council watched the wreckage burn. A silent figure stood in the dark command chamber. She chose him, she awakened the higher bond. Another voice said, "Shall we erase her anyway?" The leader shook their head. "No, it is too late. The experiment is now a revolution." She chose him freely, and the universe watched. The sun rose slowly over the mountains. Jason stood at the edge of the broken cabin, watching light touch the hills. His clothes were torn, his hands were still shaking. But he wasn't looking at the damage. He was looking at her. Lyra stood barefoot on the grass, head tilted to the sky. Her skin glowed softly, her eyes shimmered gold. And on her wrist, both names still pulsed with life. Jason, Lyra, side by side, forever linked. Suddenly, the clouds above them shifted. A voice spoke through the air, deep echoing not from Earth. "Lyra of Korath, Jason Carter of Earth, you are summoned." A glowing portal opened in the sky. Lyra didn't move. Jason stepped beside her. "Do we run?" She shook her head. "No, we walk through it together." On the other side of the portal stood the council's hall of witnesses. It floated in space, a giant ring of silver stone and living crystal orbiting a star. Crowds from 100 worlds watched through live feeds. Humans, aliens, scientists, soldiers, critics, supporters. All waiting to hear one thing. Would the bond stand or be destroyed? Lyra and Jason stepped into the center. The High Council sat on thrones above them. One elder spoke first. "You disobeyed the retrieval order." Another added, "You fought against erasure." A third said, "You changed the bond. This has never happened before." Then the leader stood. "You will now answer only one question. Lyra, was this bond forced upon you?" Lyra looked down for a second, then raised her head. Her voice was strong, clear. "No." Gasps echoed around the chamber. She continued, "I was born with his name inside me, but it meant nothing until he saw me, until he listened, until he chose me back." She stepped forward. "I didn't fall in love because they told me to. I did it because he made me feel real." Jason looked at her, stunned. Then the elder turned to him. "Jason of Earth, do you return her bond freely?" Jason nodded. "Yes, I don't know how it works, I don't know why it picked me, but I know this. No science, no plan, no council could have forced what I feel for her now." He smiled at Lyra. "This is my choice, and I'd make it again." A long silence followed. The bond pulsed between them, bright, golden, undeniable. The council leader raised a hand. "Then let the galaxy witness, the bond stands. And from this day forward, love will not be engineered, it will be chosen." The crowd across systems erupted in cheers. Later, in a quiet spaceport on Earth, Lyra and Jason walked hand in hand beneath the stars. "Are you ready for the real world?" he asked. She smiled, "Only if you're in it." He pulled her close. "So what now?" She looked up. "Now we live together. No more codes, no more orders, just us." And as they walked into the night, a single message spread across the stars. They tried to design love, but love broke the system. And it began with one human, and the girl who carried his name before she ever knew what love meant. In a galaxy where love was once programmed, one girl chose her mate, not by law, not by fate, but by heart. And the universe finally listened.